If you paid any attention in English class, you most likely remember this. I was taught that these were the parts of a story. The beginning consists of the exposition and conflict, then we go into the middle with rising action and climax, and finally ending with the falling action and resolution. But is this actually the best way to write a story? No. It's honestly criminal that they taught this in school. I guess it's good enough to deconstruct a story into its individual parts and showing how the intensity of a story builds up. But it is not useful when writing a story from the ground up. If you remember from my other video on the 10 things I've learned from my first webcomic, I said that I was lost on how to get from point A to point B. And the main reason for that was because this graph doesn't tell me anything about how to get from the beginning to the end. Let's actually plot out SUDS into this graph. The first chapter is obviously going to be the beginning and the last chapter will be at the end. Alright, now everything else goes in the middle. Somehow. Do you see what I'm talking about? This graph does nothing to tell me how to get from here to there. Conflict, sure, we can say that the dishwasher's struggle to become a chef is the conflict, but what is the rising action? It's such a vague term, and then it's mirrored after the climax as falling action. What do these things even encapsulate? With these terms, literally anything can happen in the middle of a story. I think now you're seeing the problem with this story structure, but how about the Eastern version of this? If you've looked into writing manga, I'm sure you've come across this. Sho Ten Ketsu. I like this a little bit more than the 3-act structure we previously looked at. In short, Sho Ten Ketsu is a 4-act structure, with Ki, the introduction to an idea, developing that idea in Sho, twisting the idea onto its head with Ten, and ending with the same idea we had in the beginning, but with a different outlook with Ketsu. Similar to the 3-act structure we saw before, it has this sort of linear progression. Unlike 3-act structure, however, it is a lot more versatile in how you can use it, and is more specific when telling us what to write. In terms of SUDS, the first 2 chapters are Ki, chapters 3, 4, 5, 6, and the first part of 7 is Sho. The ending of chapter 7 is our 10, and chapter 8 is Ketsu. You can make the argument that chapters 6 and 7 are the 10 of the story, instead of just the major twist that happens at the end of chapter 7, but that's not really important. Now, is Sho Ten Ketsu really the best way to write a story? No. Well, at least for me it's not. This structure is very popular in all of Eastern story media. It's used in manga, anime, Korean dramas, Chinese poetry, literally everything in that part of the world. While this structure is used widely in the East as 3-act structure is used in the West, it still has its flaws. Unlike the 3-act story structure, Sho Ten Ketsu doesn't rely on our protagonist going through conflict as the driving force of our story. Instead, it relies on the twist that turns our protagonist's world upside down. There's nothing really wrong with that line of thinking, but if you aren't careful, your story may end up in chaos. Generally, after every Sho Ten Ketsu cycle, the world of our story has changed, creating a point of no return. If the world has changed too much, too fast, and without warning, readers may be disoriented in the story. Some examples are Darling in the Franxx and Wonder Egg Priority. Darling in the Franxx was a show about teenage pilots in mechs fighting against Klaxosaurs, and all the while teen melodrama happening between them all turned into a space opera fighting against the true evil all along, the aliens. Wonder Egg Priority was a show that focused on dealing with trauma within young teen girls who were connected with tragic pasts through a magical dream world, turned into one of sci-fi and AI. Both had great concepts, developed their worlds and characters very well, but changed tracks too quickly in their twist and it ended up derailing their whole train. Not to say twists are bad, anime has some of the greatest twists you could find in entertainment. But when a twist goes wrong, it could lead to the entire story being seen as lesser than its parts. So we've gone through 3-act story structure and 4-act story structure. What's next? Let me introduce you to the story structure that I think is best, Dan Harmon's story circle. You may look at this and immediately think about the hero's journey. While similar in look and concept, Dan Harmon's story circle is a lot more versatile and condensed. The hero's journey has up to 17 very distinct points that are specifically curated to stories with protagonists who go on a fantastical adventure, grow along the way, and return having changed. However, Dan Harmon's take on the story circle has 8 points and can be used for any story of any genre. Now, there are dozens of videos out there that can explain and articulate the nuances and uses of the story circle better than I can. So I recommend watching those videos if you want to learn more in depth on how to use it. But for now, I'll go through a basic run through of the story circle so that we're all on the same page. 1. Our character is in their normal world. This is our introduction to our protagonist and the world as they see it. This is Kaneki before he becomes a ghoul, Light before he finds the Death Note, or Lelouch before he gains the power of the Geass. The goal of this section is to establish who our protagonist is and what do they believe. 2. Our character has a want. Our character wants something and it is closely tied in with what they believe. They may want their crush to confess to them instead of the other way around because they believe that love is war. Or they may want to save their school from closing down because they believe that their generation-long family tradition of graduating from the same high school is important to them. We establish a clear extrinsic want in this stage. This is our protagonist's main motivation and fuel to get the story rolling. 3. Our character enters an unfamiliar situation. This is what you know as the inciting incident, or the point in which our protagonist leaves their normal world and enters a new unknown world. This could be as crazy as a middle school class being taught how to be assassins, or something as mundane as joining the light music club. Our character is out of their comfort zone and encountering a new situation. With this, we are proposing a problem for our protagonist to solve in 4. Our character adapts. With the problem posed in 3, we now have our protagonists adapt to what has been thrown at them. They may relinquish their status as a demon lord by working at McDonald's to pay their bills, or something as simple as practicing new volleyball combos to use in the upcoming regionals. 5. Our character gets what they want. With the hard work they did in 4, they get rewarded with what they want. This could be the whole of what they want, such as establishing a new life after putting their past life behind them, or getting part of what they wanted, or clear progress toward their goal, such as unlocking a new skill to defeat the big bad. So, they get what they want. Is this the end of the story? No, because it is all taken away in 6. Our character pays. Just because our protagonist gets what they want doesn't mean it comes without a cost. In Golden Time, Bonri finally has a new life as a college student, filled with new friends and a new intimate relationship, completely separate from his old one before his amnesia. But he is haunted by the old Bonri, slowly coming back and taking control of what was once his life. In Avatar: The Last Airbender, Aang gets backed into a corner and through it was able to release his 7th chakra, enabling him to use the Avatar state at will, which was needed to defeat the Fire Lord. However, immediately after he is struck down with lightning by Azula, nearly killing him and locking his connection to the Avatar state. There is a very distinct cause and effect that happens here. Because our character gets X, they are punished with Y. 7. Our character reacts and solves the conflict. Our protagonist has just hit their lowest low with what just happened in 6. Our protagonist needs to react. How will they solve this new unforeseen problem? They may put their life on the line and fight against the big bad, or they might fight against what they previously believed in, accepting a different perspective. What they do will tell us how. 8. Our character has changed. Our protagonist is no longer the character they were back in 1. They've gone through trials and tribulations and have exited the unknown world as a changed person. What is that change? It could be as simple as finding one's identity, or as complex as the psychology of dealing with self-blame and learning to love oneself. And those are the 8 points of the story circle, but I want to touch on a couple more essential things about it. Firstly, we went over the main driving force of 3-act structure and Sho Ten Ketsu. So what is the main driving force for the story circle? I did say that 2 was a fuel source for our protagonist, but I meant it more in a way that brings our character into the unknown world at 3. The main driving force of the story circle is not the conflict at 3, nor is it the twist at 6. It is the character himself. In 1, we establish who the character is and what they believe in, and that belief is the main core of our story. All plot points stem from it. Throughout the story, we will be constantly challenging their beliefs. This will generate external conflict and internal conflict. Begone the days of plot-driven versus character-driven stories. With the story circle, it is one and the same. In short, the character's extrinsic want isn't their end goal. It is only a lie. Their true goal is to change and find their truth. Secondly, the versatility of Dan Harmon's story circle. It can be used to plot entire series, whole arcs, or even single chapters. It is able to be scaled up or scaled down. The main thing to keep in mind is that when looking at a series as a whole, the first chapter or episode usually contains the 1, 2, and 3 of the story circle, while the rest of the story is 4, up until the end where 5, 6, 7, and 8 take place in either the final arc or the final chapter. While this is true, all individual chapters should be housed within their own story circles. Think of it as a fractal. It's the same pattern even when going down to the minute details. But that's not where the versatility ends. Like I said before, the story structure works with a wide range of genres, and the story circle can not only be used for the protagonist, but any character that goes through an arc. Main characters, side characters, supporting characters, or even antagonists. Every character has their own story circle going on from their point of view. Thirdly, the story circle is not a template. It is a guide to preserve and maintain momentum in your story. You are 100% able to skip parts of the story circle. You are able to go on without changing at 8 or without adapting at 4, or even without getting something at 5. But the more you take away from the circle, the less it becomes recognizable as a story. Lastly, I want to touch on the connections and mirrorings in the story circle. 1, 2, 5, and 8 are all interconnected. This is your protagonist's internal journey throughout the story. In 1, they have a belief that is fueling their want in 2, but when they get their want in 5, they'll still feel incomplete. Remember, your character's want is superficial. It is something they want because of their belief, but what they need is to change. 3 and 7 mirror each other in the sense of your character leaving one world and going into another world. The entirety of the top half of the circle is your character's normal world where they're comfortable and stagnant, while the bottom half is the unknown world where they learn, grow, and change. Stories are cyclical in nature because we as human beings are also cyclical. We constantly enter new situations that force us to make choices that eventually end up changing us, and go through that cycle over and over again. The final mirror I want to explain is the mirroring between what happens between 3 and 4 versus 6 and 7. These two pairs mirror each other in a way that shows character growth, aka character arcs. We have an initial problem that our character encounters in 3 and we see how they deal with it in 4. Then in 6 we have an even greater problem and we see how they deal with it in 7. And yes, it needs to be a bigger problem. Raising the stakes is a must. If they lose a couple of dollars in 3, they'll need to lose 100 in 6. This will show, even in a dire situation, your character's true self or what they believed in has changed. Or, to put it simply, how your protagonist reacts in 4 informs us who they are, while how your protagonist reacts in 7 shows us how they've changed. This is what the story circle excels at, showing character arcs through plot and creating plot through character change. There are other mirrors and connections within the story circle, like how each point is directly opposite to its counter on the story circle, both physically and metaphorically, but the ones I just went over are the ones I think are most important and relevant to keep in mind. While I was going through the points of the story circle, I did bring up a couple examples through multiple anime and TV shows, but it might have been a little confusing if you've never seen some of them. So I want to go through 2 series to make sure you've got this all down. So, spoiler warning, obviously. I'm going to go over the first season of Code Geass and the manga of Nisekoi. So why choose these two? There are already dozens of videos analyzing Western films and TV shows using the story circle, so I wanted to choose ones that were clearly not written by Westerners or for Westerners. I wanted to drive home the point that all stories follow this structure, whether the author intended it or not. I also specifically chose these two because I wanted to cover a wide range of genre, and I think there's nothing more further apart than an action mecha military anime and a rom-com harem manga. Now let's quickly go through them. We'll start off with the action military Code Geass and see how it fits into the story circle. 1. Lelouch v Britannia. Our main protagonist is the Lelouch Lamperouge, aka Lelouch v Britannia, the 11th Prince of the Holy Britannian Empire and son of the 98th Emperor of Britannia. A smart and cunning tactician, he has a strong sense of justice and he believes that the world under his father's rule isn't just, thinking he can rule it better, especially after his mother's assassination and seeing his father's lack of concern and unwillingness to protect him and his crippled sister Nunnally. 2. He wants to create a world safe for his sister. His main goal is to overthrow Britannia to pursue a better world for Nunnally, but after being exiled to Japan, he was powerless. 3. He meets C2. Years later, he meets a mysterious girl named C2 and makes a contract with her. Through this contract, he was given the power of Geass, the ability to control and command anybody he wishes. 4. Adapt. With this new power in his hands, he realizes that he's finally able to take over Britannia. He assumes the role of leader of the rebellion under the alias Zero. With the help of other rebels, he creates the Black Knights, an organization that helps to protect the weak in the name of justice. Throughout the story, he and the Black Knights fight against the Britannian military forces, slowly chipping away at the Britannian settlements. 5. Meeting with Euphemia. Eventually, his identity as Zero was figured out by one of his half-sisters, Princess Euphemia. Seeing his and Nunnally's situation, she finds a non-violent solution that will help Lelouch with getting his goals to keep Nunnally safe, to create a special zone and recognize Japan as an independent nation, one separate from Britannia. She calls out to Zero to join her and help create a place of coexistence between Japanese and Britannians. 6. He loses control of his Geass. At first, Lelouch tries to object to Euphemia's plans, but he ends up accepting them anyway. However, at that moment he loses control of his Geass, accidentally using his powers on Euphemia, forcing her to commit mass genocide against the Japanese, making her an enemy to Japan, and in turn creating larger conflicts between them and Britannia. Their plans to create a better world crumbles before them. 7. The Black Knights fight with the Britannians. To prevent any further chaos, Lelouch chooses to kill Euphemia and uses her actions as a symbol of Britannia's hypocrisy. Lelouch uses this as a way to rally more people behind him and the Black Knights. This spirals into an attack on the Tokyo settlement, creating all-out war, hurting the people closest to him. 8. Lelouch hasn't changed. He still holds the same resentment towards his father. He continues with his idea of challenging and overthrowing the Britannian Empire. Throughout the story so far, he knows from experience that his actions to create a better future may cost him the lives of many of the people he's closest to. But despite that, he still goes about his plans for the sake of Nunnally. As you can see, a character doesn't need to go through change, especially if it's not the end of the story. In fact, it's best to keep the change minor, slow, or even non-existent if it's not the end, since change marks that our character arc has completed. If we were to look at Code Geass as a whole, Lelouch's change would have been his understanding that even if he ruled the world, he wouldn't be able to reshape it into his ideal vision. Thus, his master plan, Zero Requiem, to make himself the target of hatred across the world and then staging an assassination on himself for the sake of world peace. Now let's take a look at how a story circle may look like in a rom-com with Nisekoi. 1. Raku Ichijo. Our main protagonist in this story is a high schooler named Raku Ichijo, who is the son of a Yakuza leader. He's your typical harem protagonist with a crush on a classmate since junior high named Kosaki Onodera. 10 years ago, he made a promise with a girl, a promise to meet again in hopes to one day get married, symbolized by a pendant kept by Raku and a key that was given to the promised girl. 2. He wants to figure out who he made the promise to. The problem being he doesn't remember who he made the promise with. He can't remember the name or face of that girl 10 years ago. All he knows is he has a pendant with a lock on it and that she holds a key that will unlock it. 3. He is put in a situation where he needs to be in a fake relationship. One fateful day, he runs into a transfer student named Shitoge Kirisaki, daughter of a rival gangster syndicate. When they first met, they hated each other's guts, and those feelings only heightened when they both find out that they need to fake being in a relationship for 3 years to keep their families from going to war. 4. Adapt. Throughout the series, they go about faking the relationship, though not without obstacles, namely keeping their secret from their rivaling families, the existence of multiple keys held by different girls, being his fake girlfriend Shitoge, his first crush Kosaki, his fiancée Marika Tachibana, and childhood friend Yui Kanakura, as well as supporting cast members who end up falling in love with Raku, such as the assassin and bodyguard to Shitoge, Seishiro Tsugumi, and Kosaki's younger sister Haru. As you would expect from a rom-com, they go through some wacky adventures between Raku and the girls of the series, and through these stories they slowly uncover the truth behind the pendant and their keys, finding out that they all had met 10 years ago. 5. He finds out who he made the promise to. As the series comes to a close, Raku, Shitoge, and the others uncover the truth, accepting their feelings towards each other and figuring out who the promised girl was. It was Kosaki, Raku's first love. 6. He created a real relationship with the person he hated most, creating a love triangle. Even though throughout the series, Raku wanted Kosaki to be the promised girl, he fell in love with Shitoge. Throughout the 3 years of his fake relationship with her, they created a genuine connection, questioning everything he knew he wanted. He's faced with a choice. Choose Kosaki, the one he made a promise to all those years ago, his first true love, and his dream girl. Or choose Shitoge, the one he didn't get along with at the beginning but fell in love with slowly through all their shared antics together. 7. Raku chooses best girl. In the end, he turned down Kosaki's love confession and chose Shitoge. 8. Raku has changed. From someone who was set on believing that their promised girl was going to be his one true love, into loving the rival gang leader's daughter. Despite their rocky relationship in the beginning, he threw away his past notions of his promise with Kosaki to finally accept Shitoge as the one he loves. Although we looked at the series as a whole through a retrospective lens, it's important to remember that when writing, every chapter or episode has their own self-contained story circle. They may not have all 8 points, but generally speaking, the structure is still there. Hopefully this will help people struggling with how to move a story forward, or someone who's just lost and drowning in their own sea of ideas. I know when I first learned about the story circle, it legitimately felt like I could finally see story clearly. It wasn't a vague soupy mess of random scenes and plot points. It was an actual strong structural foundation that the rest of the story was built upon. Now that the video is coming to a close, you should be able to see this story pattern in many of the stories you love. It's important to remember that these concepts aren't concrete and can change depending on the situation. Some of the things I didn't really touch on were the existence of different types of arcs and how those fit into the story circle, the significance of the normal world and the unknown world in relation to a character's belief, how a story circle may look like when there's a cliffhanger, or even how a story circle may look like when there's no extrinsic want for a character, something like in a slice of life genre. There are many nuances to be talked about, but I don't want to make this video an hour long, so maybe I'll save that for a later date. Thank you for watching. If you liked it, subscribe and like the video. If you don't want to do that, that's fine too. Still not good with outros, so bye.